Estou passando nesse podcast para dividir uma informação que fez toda a diferença na minha vida. Quer fazer pós-graduação, mas tá impossível correr de um lugar pro outro?
Pois é, ainda mais com o trânsito.
Então você precisa conhecer a educação à distância do Senac. Sabia que é nota máxima no MEC? E tem diversos cursos de pós-graduação para te levar ainda mais longe. 100% online, sem necessidade de TCC e com acesso direto a todos os professores.
Ah, saber isso fez diferença sim.
Inscreva-se já na pós-graduação EAD. Quer saber? Senac EAD.
Hi, I'm Caitlin, a podcast producer here at C-SPAN. This week on C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast, former New York Times editor Lawrence Ingrassia speaks about cancer research and his own family's rare medical history with the disease. Wall Street Journal health and science reporter Amy Dockser Marcus interviews him.
Hey, Larry, it's so nice to be here with you.
It's great to see you, Amy. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. I wanted to talk about your amazing book. It's partly a family memoir, and it's partly this, thrilling story of trying to unravel this scientific and medical mystery. Why did you decide to combine those stories rather than just a memoir or just a science story?
I have to go back to how I got interested in this. And I wasn't really initially thinking of writing a book. In September of 2019, my brother died. And with his death, my family had been wiped out by cancer. My mother died in 1968 when she was just 42 years old, and she had had a breast cancer, and she had had cancer off and on for about a decade. Our youngest sister died when she was 24 of an abdominal cancer. Our next sister died at age 32 of lung cancer. And also one of my nephews, one of my brother's son, had cancer at age 2 and eventually died of his third cancer when he was 39. My brother had his first cancer at 46 and died at 69. And, I just was curious to know more about what this inherited condition was that had caused all these cancers and died. And it was called Li-Fraumeni syndrome. I knew very little about it. I knew that it was caused by a mutation in a really an important gene called P53, which I knew very little about. So I started digging around, just kind of going on the internet. I wanted to understand this. And it launched me on this journey of discovery. And it was, as you mentioned, it was two types of discovery. It was the discovery about my family and a discovery about, how these doctors solved this medical mystery. And it became a little bit broader, a discovery about how science evolves, how, the understanding of cancer evolves. And it just occurred to me, I wanted to tell a story that would reach a lot of people. And in doing so, I wanted to be not just about my family, although I thought it was an interesting story, but also a family about, scientific discovery, about, researchers going out into the unknown, finding stuff that, and trying to help people. And that's how the idea of when I finally decided to write a book, weaving together these stories probably would be the best way to reach people, to touch people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's really interesting that one of the main points you make is that the scientists who sort of made these discoveries relied on family trees and family histories and families. Can you talk a little bit about how important family history is in understanding diseases like cancer?
Yeah, so you go back, it's one thing that I had to do, and I think it's important that readers do, because you think how much is known about cancer today. A lot is known about cancer today. We're still trying to solve it. But if you go back to the 1960s, cancer was quite a bit of a black box. At that time, the belief of most cancer researchers was that the vast majority of cancers were caused by viruses. So a lot of the research was focused on that. But still, there was much that was not understood. And it turns out that a bunch of what was understood was wrong. So two young doctors at the National Cancer Institute, Frederick Lee and Joseph Fraumeni, in the late 1960s, stumbled across a family that they found very interesting. It started with a father who was just 23 years old, who had leukemia. And while he was being treated for leukemia in Baltimore, his 10-month-old son developed a soft tissue cancer in his arm. Either of these would have been very unusual because of the young ages of these cancers. But as they started looking into this family, they found that it was riddled for generations with cancer, all kinds of cancers, often starting with young cancers. And it was this journey that they began to kind of put together. Okay, first of all, we have to figure out a family tree. How many? That wasn't easy. It was a sprawling family all over the United States. But they did. It took them a couple of years. And what they found was this astonishing array of cancers, which led them to write a paper in 1969. This was just a year after my mother had died, that said, kind of, is there something going on here? Is there a familial syndrome? In fact, their paper ended in a question mark.
I loved that point.
Yes, because they couldn't be sure. I mean, they were surmising based on the history, but they couldn't rule out, as they noted in the paper, they couldn't rule out that it was environmental cause. They couldn't rule out that it might have been caused by some unknown virus, even though they tested the tissues from some of the family members and couldn't find anything. And they couldn't rule out it was just kind of random chance. I mean, there are more than 100 million families in the United States. So the fact that you would have some families with a high level of cancer would not be surprising. But still, they were kind of curious enough that, kind of maybe there is something, we don't know, but maybe there is something going on. And to their credit, even though there was a lot of skepticism by the more established cancer researchers about the paper, didn't get a lot of attention. And to the extent that it did was like, hey, it's just random. You can't really be for sure. Yet they were undeterred. And they decided to keep following this family and some of the other families that were in that. They had 4 families total in that paper, but they were focusing mostly on this family, family A. And then over the years, kept adding more families. And kind of it's to their credit. One of the things that I found fascinating, not having been a science writer in the past, is just kind of learning how science and scientific discovery occurs. It's halting, it's slow, it takes a lot of patience. It is very meticulous. But Lee and Frau Mini, joined by other researchers over time, started to build more and more of a case that maybe something really is going on here.
Yeah. Do you think that one of the things that makes their research and scientific research in general slow is funding? Could you describe how a rise in public funding for cancer research and a recognition of cancer as a public health disease did seem to change things up?
I think it's a combination of funding and when you come across something new, that it's hard to figure out exactly what is going on. So in the funding, remember, there was an increase in funding, but a lot of the funding went to look at, kind of potential viral causes of cancer. Now, it turns out that about 10 to 15% of cancers are caused by viruses, but that's a small percentage compared to what was believed at the time. The bigger issue, I think, and again, you have to kind of go back into time, and it's hard to think about it, the technology, the understanding of genetics and the human genome, and the tools to look inside, kind of our genes and to examine individual genes and see what's going, has expanded dramatically in the past 50 years. Kind of back in the 1960s and early 1970s and even until the 80s, kind of there was, kind of this knowledge about, kind of maybe how genetics work, but there wasn't the tools to really look inside. There was an explosion. There was a true scientific explosion of knowledge about genetics in that period of time. And so it just took science to catch up with their theory before they could actually kind of look inside genes and find out. So again, it kind of gets back to that point is that, science is so fascinating that we think that there is a straight line. Rarely is there a straight line. And we think that it happens like this. But often you have to have a bunch of things all come together. And it wasn't just them. There were other pioneers that started looking at genetics. And I think it was the collective knowledge that started to come together in the 70s and 80s that finally enabled some of their breakthrough findings.
One of the interesting things you point out in your own family, which I think helps illustrate why this is so challenging for researchers too, is that after your mom passed away, it was like more than a decade until another incidence of cancer popped up in your family. So I think, like as you were doing research on the book, did you learn a little bit more about, what we understand now, why some people who are in the same family and maybe have the same mutation, of course, why they may get a different cancer, or they may get a cancer earlier or later in life rather than clustering all at the same time or in the same organ.
Right. So again, kind of, it's fascinating, and it's another explanation, as you note, Amy, about why it takes so long. So even in this family A, which was riddled with cancers, you would go several years without any member getting cancer, and then you might have 2 or 3 get cancer in the same year. One of the things that Lee and Fraumini started concluding over time was that even though they couldn't totally rule out initially there was an environmental factor, these family members were all living in different parts of the country. So that helped them say, you know what, it's unlikely that it's environmental. In addition, it's unlikely it's viral. Maybe if they were all living together and spreading a virus among themselves. But it took, kind of, there were all these long time periods, even more so with my family. So my mother died in '68, and my youngest sister was 1980 when she got cancer, and 6 months later in early 1981 that she died of cancer. There still is not a lot of understanding after all the research about why, people with Lee-Fraumeni syndrome in families with the same mutation, one gets cancer at age 2, like my nephew, and kind of his dad, my brother, Paul, doesn't get cancer, his first cancer at 46, and they get different cancers. There's still a lot of ongoing research to try to understand that. So even with all the advances, what you realize is that, kind of science is constantly evolving, understanding is constantly evolving, advances are constantly, kind of being made, but there's still a lot that is unknown.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty remarkable given how many years have passed since the original discovery. It feels like it would have gone even faster, but I was thinking about, do you think, you talk a lot in the book about scientific competition versus scientific collaboration. Let's talk about the competition, because that is a very dramatic and exciting part of the book. You've got these groups competing to be the first. They, sequencing the gene, looking for the mutation, trying to figure it out. They want to be first. It's exciting to be first.
Right.
We know that as reporters. Exciting to be first. So can you talk about that excitement, and then we'll move into the collaboration aspect of things too.
So again, you had a bunch of different scientists interested in genetics. It was in the 70s and into the 80s, attention started shifting toward, kind of maybe genetics as a bigger cause of cancer, and inherited genetic conditions are a bigger cause of cancer than believed. At the same time, there was a growing recognition that there were environmental factors as well. So you have all these different things going on at the same time. And to some extent, scientists, one of the ways that they collaborate is they publish papers, somebody else reads a paper, and then they say, maybe I should examine this. So there was a lot of informal, as I would put it, collaboration. One discovery adding to another throughout that period of time. For example, it was around in the late 70s that this gene P53 was first identified. It was co-discovered by a couple of scientists, one in the US and one in Scotland. They didn't know exactly what its purpose was, but it did enable other scientists to start saying, hey, maybe we should study this gene. So you have all this stuff that is evolving. Finally, you get to the late 80s, where you're talking about where the competition starts heating up. You have the tools for the first time to do gene sequencing. That is, you have the tools to kind of look inside individual genes and see where mutations occur. And so there were 2 teams, unbeknownst to each other, that had tissues from families with Lee-Fraumeni syndrome, from these cancer-ridden families, that are both trying to find is there a specific mutation in a specific gene that is common in all the family members who have cancer, but for the family members who don't have cancer, they don't have that mutation. There are a lot of genes in the body, so kind of figuring out where to look is one of the big challenges that they have. And so two teams, both starting in 1989, kind of start this search using this new relatively new gene sequencing technology, which is very laborious. Nowadays, it can be done, kind of because technology improved, it can be done very fast, but it was very laborious back then. Amazingly, after more than a year of looking at the genes and doing all this gene sequencing, in August 1990, both identify a mutation on the same gene, P53, after looking at other genes, that is in common in all these leaf Ramini families. And neither of them know it. So both know that they have to, any scientist, you don't want to be wrong. So what you do, the first thing when you find something, a new discovery, you do the test again. You want to make sure you're right. You do it 2 or 3 times. And then you start writing a paper, and they're being very careful about everything. So it turns out one of the teams up at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston managed to get into publication just slightly before the other. But there was also a little bit of back drama because they finally, about a month before, in October, they learned of each other. And that ended up in this big race to be first. And one team was first, the other was a few weeks later because they just took a little bit more time to write their paper and get it in. And, kind of the first team, like you talk about journalists, the first team got the credit and the second team, kind of got much less credit. It's like also going to the World Series. Nobody remembers who lost the World Series. Everybody remembers who won the World Series. But actually, they're two great teams. And I think in that case, there were two great teams here doing the research.
You have these great scenes where like one of the teams like races to get their paper in the hands of FedEx so that they can get it to the journal, faster.
Yeah. Think back in the day, kind of no email, you can't kind of get it that way, he drove onto the tarmac at Boston Logan Airport to get, kind of the written paper in so that it could then be sent down to New York and get into publication first. It was, I think, very exciting times for all that. I think, and amidst all the competition, the important thing is that it was solved. This medical mystery was solved. It was a huge, huge scientific breakthrough. It was not just in the scientific world. The New York Times ran a front page story, 2 columns above the fold. The Wall Street Journal ran a very large story saying, hey, there's this amazing medical breakthrough. Where for the first time we've identified a major gene with a mutation that causes cancer. And it turns out this gene is very important because it's a cancer suppressor gene. So we all have, our cells are constantly dividing. And most of the divisions, the mutations that we have when our cells are dividing are benign. Occasionally there's a mutation that could become malignant, that could be cancerous. But P53 is this amazing gene that over millennia has evolved into what is called a cancer suppressor gene. It's a seek and destroy gene. It finds potentially cancerous cells, identifies them, and either kills them or repairs them. I mean, how amazing is that? The problem, of course, if you're born with that gene in a mutated form, it doesn't do its job nearly as well. But this was a huge, huge breakthrough that kind of raised kind of a lot of excitement, but it also explained a lot. Like, for example, my family A, why there were so many cancers. So it turns out kind of if you're born with this inherited mutation, the figures are staggering and kind of heartbreaking. By age 40, if you have this inherited mutation, there's a 50% chance that you'll have had cancer, and often multiple cancers, often starting at early ages. It's versus a 5% chance in the overall population. And you can extrapolate that all the way out. That's how pernicious this particular mutation is.
So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
And how many.
Yeah. And there's a 50-50 chance, that you'll inherit it from the parent that has it?
Yes. There's a 50-50 chance. And it turns out that I did not, which was, kind of quirk of fate, kind of the luck of the scientific draw. And that explains why I've never had cancer. I'm in my early 70s now. Never had cancer and always, kind of been been healthy, which on the one hand is great, which the other hand, looking at my siblings, my family's history, it's like, kind of amazing and hard.
Yeah, you talk about this. There's a very sort of poignant part of your book where you talk about people's decisions. There's a test that people can take now to
Right.
learn whether they've inherited this mutation or not. And you describe in your book how different people decide whether they want to know or they don't want to know. And can you talk a little bit about what prompted you to take the test?
So, interestingly, my brother and I never really suspected, even though so much has been written, even at the Wall Street Journal, and my brother and I are both senior editors at the Wall Street Journal, we never paid attention to the research that said, by the way, cancer-ridden families, may have a genetic defect. And P53 is probably it has become the most studied gene in the human body, but there are 40 or 50 different, cancer genes, mutations that predispose people with cancer. Probably the best known is BRCA, which was discovered in 1994, a few years after P53 mutation, Li-Fraumeni syndrome. And BRCA, of course, causes breast cancer and occasionally ovarian cancer too. So why didn't we suspect that we had a mutation? Kind of goes back. Our father was a research chemist in the wood products industry. He worked with a lot of different chemicals. So our supposition for many years was he must have carried chemicals home, on his clothes, tiny particles that when he was at home, get in the air, we must have breathed them in, which resulting in cancer many years later. That kind of fit a little bit with the growing understanding of environmental carcinogens, of all types. Yeah. We didn't have any, there was no proof of that, but of course it's hard to prove, if you have a cancer that is caused by a carcinogen, it's hard to prove that. So we had this very much in our mind. You kind of persuade yourself that something, there is no explanation, you look for an explanation. That's human nature. And so I think we persuaded ourselves that that must be it. So flash forward to 2015. And my brother, who had survived his lung cancer and had also then a few years after that prostate cancer and survived that. His prostate cancer, there was some concern that it might be coming back. At which point, his doctor said, with your cancer, your son's cancer, your sister's dying of cancer, your mother dying of cancer, maybe you have a genetic mutation. And given the fact that there are all these different cancers, which is a signature of the P53 mutation, given that you have all these different cancers, maybe you should get tested. And so he got tested, and sure enough, he tested positive. He sent a note to me, and he said, it's actually, it's almost a relief to know that, because now we have a real explanation of all these, cancers in our family. And now that you have the mutation, what I can do is kind of get screened frequently and try to catch any potential cancers early, which is one of the benefits of knowing. I still didn't think a lot about it. At that point I was in my, early 60s. I hadn't had any cancers, and so I didn't immediately say, I need to go get tested. And plus, by the way, back then, testing was, genetic test was quite expensive, $3,000, $5,000. And, insurance sometimes covers it, sometimes doesn't. But finally, I've got two kids, and my daughter said, Dad, I would really like you to get tested. And that was the moment where I said, okay, I'll get tested. And one of the driving things is, my brother said, well, you know what, there's a high chance if you have the mutation that you will get cancer. But, it's also, a small percentage chance that, people with this mutation, it's like less than 5% will get cancer in a lifetime. So it's possible that I was a carrier, that I actually had the mutation, but didn't have cancer. But because I was a carrier, then I could have passed it on to my children.
Right. So you ended up doing the test.
So I ended up doing the test. Unfortunately, he got me into an academic study. His doctor knew somebody was doing an academic study, so I was able to get it at no cost. And I tested negative, which was a great relief, of course, to my children, because that meant they didn't have it. They couldn't pass it on to their children, my grandchildren. I'd point out, by the way, the cost of genetic testing has declined dramatically. Now, it's not cheap for everybody, but it's like $250 for a genetic test. And if you have a lot of cancers in your family, especially if they are cancers at young ages, I would recommend that you consider get tested. I mean, you should talk to a genetic counselor. There are issues. Some people don't want to know. Some people, feel that it could affect their insurance. That's all understandable. But the benefit of knowing if you have a genetic mutation, not just this, but whether it's BRCA or whatever, then you can, get regular screening. The best way to catch to beat cancer is to catch it at early stages.
Some of the people you quote in the book who are part of families that have this gene mutation also, they say something that really, made me stop, like in the middle of reading and really ponder. Some of them said that they don't want to take the test because there's not all that much that doctors can offer them, and,
right.
Even if they find out that they're positive for this mutation. And, it is incredibly frustrating that there isn't something more. And can you talk a little bit about that? And, especially from the perspective of a person who's, part of one of these families.
Yeah. So again, think of it's important to think of the P53 mutation versus, say, the BRCA mutation, or Lynch syndrome, named after Dr. Henry Lynch, another of the genetics pioneers. Lynch syndrome causes colon cancer. With Lynch syndrome, having the test and knowing that you have it is very important, because there is something that you can do. You can get regular colonoscopies starting at a young age, and they can spot precancerous polyps before they become cancerous. So the death rate of people who have Lynch syndrome and who get regular colonoscopies and get them taken care of has dropped dramatically. So you can do something very directly treatment-wise if you have Lynch syndrome. Similarly with BRCA, a woman can make a decision. It's not an easy decision, but if you're really concerned, first of all, you can get screened frequently, but also you can choose to have a mastectomy or double mastectomy. Again, I'm not saying it's an easy decision, but there is something that that you can actually do that has been shown to affect the outcome. Yeah. P53 is more complicated. It can result in cancers any place in your body. So what do? You can't I'm going to get a mastectomy, although there are a lot of breast cancers in women who have Leaf-Brown-Menia syndrome. You can't choose to, just lop off different parts of your body or have surgery everywhere. So that's why the only thing that really is shown to be helpful is regular screening to try to catch them early. And some people say, well, I'm going to still get the cancers anyway. And I think that's why there's this hesitation. Why should I, there is nothing that can be done. And in one way that is true, there's no surgical procedure. There's no magic bullet drug that can be done to treat that. Not now. We can hope someday. But all the studies that have been done have shown that if you do regular screening, it prolongs life on average by 5 to 10 years. It doesn't mean you're not going to get cancer. You're still going to get the cancer, but you can probably catch the cancer earlier. And that's really the to me the value. And the other thing I say to people, especially people who have it and they have children, it maybe will let you live longer. So you'll be around longer as a parent for your child. So consider that as well as one of the factors. Again, it's a very personal decision. I would never presume to tell somebody, kind of, you should get tested, you shouldn't get tested, you need to make that decision yourself in consultation with the rest of your family and your genetic counselor.
Yeah. I'd love to sort of also hear a little bit about, the research and investigation that went into this book. I mean, you're a great reporter and you did so much reporting on this book, not only about the other families that worked with the scientists, but your own family. Yeah. What was it like to report on your own family, on your siblings and your parents?
Yeah. As we talked about earlier, and the book alternates between chapters, my family, family A, and we can talk about family A a little bit, kind of such a fascinating family, and the researchers and the research, and all, I found it all pretty fascinating. I thought that kind of going into, I know my family's history, that will be easy. Well, on a one level, it was kind of easy because I did know my family's history, but I realized that there are a lot of things that I didn't know and that I needed to know more about. And so, again, that's why I call this, it really is a journey of discovery, a journey of reconnection. So my youngest sister, Angela, died when she was 24. And, again, this is like more than 40 years ago, and I was living in a different city. Of course, I spent time and went down, she was living in Chicago with her. But there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know. But I did know that she had a best friend who was by her side most of the time. Angela was never married, but her best friend was named Anita. And I had forgotten her Anita's last name, but fortunately my wife remembered her last name. And so, I went on the internet, so much of the stuff that finding people, finding information, you can find, you can get on the internet nowadays, which has been very hard to do years ago. And, I tracked her down on Facebook. I sent her a message that said, Anita, you may or may not remember me, but I'm Angela's brother. Could you talk? And of course, immediately heard back, and she was like, oh my gosh, I think about Angela. I think about Angela all the time. I mean, they were like close friends. They had been college friends, and they lived in the same apartment building in Chicago. And she told me stuff that I didn't know. Angela had had some abdominal pains for a couple of months, didn't say anything, and finally said to Anita, Anita said, oh, you got to see a doctor. Angela saw a doctor, but then, went away for the weekend. I think it may have been Memorial Day, so it was a long weekend. Amazingly, the doctor, who was Anita's doctor, referred to, called Anita and said, I need to talk to Angela like right away. This is before cell phones, and so there was no way for her to reach Angela. Angela got home, and Anita said, your doctor needs to talk to you. And she said, why? He says, well, the doctor thinks that you might have cancer. I mean, it was amazing. And just the whole kind of connection. And she was able to tell me all Angela's fears. She put me in touch with other friends of Angela. So again, even though I didn't, I thought I knew everything, there was so much that I didn't know, about Angela's hopes and fears. Anita shared some, letters that Angela had written. And similarly with my sister Gina, who was a little bit older, was married, never had children. She died when she was 32. And I had been in touch, forever with her husband. But when I told him I wanted to write a book, he said, oh, I've got a diary that Gina wrote, would you like that? And I said, well, sure. So Gina began keeping a diary when she was sick, when she found out that she was sick. And again, she died within about 6 months. And it was very, it's very cathartic. It was also painful to read the diary because going back, this was in the 80s when there was a lot of feeling like, mind over matter. If you just have enough willpower, you can defeat illness, including cancer. And so I'm reading this, and Gina is not exactly blaming herself, but saying, look, this is up to me to beat this cancer. If I'm just am more positive, if I have stronger willpower, this cancer will go away. I can expel it from my body. And I'm reading this and thinking, oh my God, you didn't know we actually had this Gene, it's, kind of, there's nothing that you could have been done. And the other thing I learned, which was, kind of very hard, is that Michael told me, her husband, told me, actually, when Gina was diagnosed, the doctor said, you have 6 months to live. You should get your affairs in order. And they never told us. She didn't tell me or my brother. And I was like, why not? Well, if you put in that context, again, to tell us that would have been to accept, kind of defeat. To tell us that would have reduced her ability to have the willpower to expel the cancer. Again, it kind of goes back to, kind of sometimes what, kind of people are told, what people think. I think that was faux science at the time, but it was pretty popular. Again, it was kind of painful to hear her kind of thinking about that and not telling us that it was terminal. Fortunately, we were able to spend a fair amount of time with her. We, again, lived in different cities, but we spent a fair amount of time with her. So I was happy to have that, have those strong memories. But still, kind of, that was part of, this journey, was learning more. I was never able to find a lot of about my mother. All the medical records are gone, kind of, but I did come across some lovely, kind of back and forth with her mother, kind of little snippets, kind of a few handwritten notes, not a lot, but, kind of for everybody, kind of, I would, whether you have cancer or you have illness in your family, kind of that reconnecting with the past, I would kind of greatly encourage it. It's really moving. It kind of, kind of is fulfilling. In the end, kind of what's important in life. Family is, kind of friends, kind of that's important in life.
How did you weigh, I was thinking about this a lot as I was reading the book, how did you weigh what to reveal? I mean, because it's very private to read someone's diary. She's writing it. She's not anticipating that her brother or anyone else, let alone people who aren't related to her, are going to read about it. How did you, and when you write about a public figure or you write about someone who's consented to be in your work, these letters and diaries revealing the inner life, that's so essential as a part of reporting. But how did you weigh how to respect her privacy versus the desire to make her come alive, and knowing that you were reading something that she might not have wanted to show her brother?
Amy, it's such a good question, because I did think about that quite a bit, about both of my sisters, and I won't kind of go into it, but there's one thing about my sister Angela, for anybody who reads the book, I think that kind of you read it and kind of it will kind of almost make you cry. It made me cry about some kind of her, about her hopes and desires, kind of, she wasn't married, but, kind of she had hopes and desires and that. And so why would I include that? In fact, one of my editors asked me, kind of, why did you talk about some very personal things in the book in that way? And to me, and similarly with my sister Gina from the diary, to me, kind of, it was important to show a life cut short. What does one, all the things that we who have been fortunate to live long lives have been able to do, that we almost take for granted, that somebody who has, kind of a disease whose life is cut short, they miss out on all these things. And I just wanted to show kind of the pain for somebody like that, the pain in a family of what it is to have, kind of a life cut short. And so I did weigh that. I thought long and hard about including some of those things in. And kind of even thought, kind of if I, kind of was sitting there with them, kind of, and they were going to ask me, kind of, why did you include that? And I say, because this is where I think it's really important. And I know that, kind of, it might be a little bit painful, but for a reader, I really want to kind of, kind of give them this sense of what you missed out on, kind of what I missed out on, kind of by not having you around.
I thought it was very beautiful and very brave, but I did think about that. The other thing I thought about that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is, you and Paul, and both of you, and as hard-nosed reporters, and you say several times in the book, actually, you point out that you're journalists and you didn't ask a lot of questions, or you didn't push, or you didn't like go after the doctors with tough questions that you might have had you been doing an article for the Wall Street Journal or for the New York Times. So can you talk about like that disconnect, right, from your reporter selves, which is such an essential part of who you are, and the fact that when it came to confronting your doctors or pushing back, you weren't so much reporters as patients and family members?
I don't know. Kind of, it's such a question, because you kind of, I've asked myself that. So the first thing I would say is, when you get a cancer diagnosis, your initial reaction isn't, oh, what caused it? Your initial reaction is, am I going to survive? What is the treatment? You're so focused on the moment. And that's actually what is most important, kind of trying to talk to the doctors. What is the best way to deal with this? And kind of look, with my nephew Charlie, kind of when he had his first cancer, it was a cancer in his jaw, kind of he was 2 years old, in his cheek rather. The doctor said he had a 20% chance of survival. I mean, you're really thinking, what does my child need? Kind of. Similarly for my brother's cancer, my sister's cancer, you're really laser focused on that. The cause of the cancer, whatever it is, it turns out to be, kind of far less important to you than kind of what do I need to try to survive this thing. And we did ask some questions. So for example, kind of my sister Gina's husband Michael, after she died, he actually sent a letter to an academic in the forest products research world, saying, could my wife's cancer have been caused by some of the chemicals her dad carried home as a research chemist working in the wood products industry? And the guy said, look, I can't tell you for sure. I just don't know. It seems unlikely that the minute amounts that he might have carried home would cause cancer. But still, that didn't dispel us, because we didn't have the other reason. Kind of why we didn't kind of follow more closely, kind of the evolving research and the understanding of kind of cancer genetics. I really can't explain that. Kind of, I wish I could turn back the clock, because I don't know that it would have helped, but having that understanding would have been good.
Yeah, you also do an amazing journalistic feat of tracking down all these families, other families whose genetics helped, the scientists identify what was going on. Before you talk about that, I was also sort of curious, when you approached them, these families, when you were reaching out to interview them and, you're writing a book, did you also say that, hey, I have skin in this game.
Yes.
I'm not just a reporter. Yeah. I'm a family member.
Yeah. So very early on, I felt that to be able to tell how the medical mystery was solved, it was really important to try to find one of the families that was the subject of the research. My family was not the subject of any research, again, because we didn't actually know until many years later that we had Li-Fraumeni syndrome. I told the NCI, which was very helpful to me, kind of, Dr. Fraumeni is still alive. Dr. Li died in 2015. So he was very helpful in explaining, kind of take me back in time, how they kind of initially kind of came onto this, how they, kind of wrote this paper, and had a lot of skepticism early on. But kind of, again, we're 50 or 60 years on, he's got a very sharp memory, but he didn't remember every detail. And so I knew to really make this book compelling, you need to tell it through the families and the families who lived it and suffered, in addition to the science and how they kind of solved that medical mystery. And so, kind of, I contacted the NCI. I said, can you put me in touch with this family A, which is so central? And they said, you know what, patient confidentiality. And I had told them, I understand that might be difficult. But I said, can you, if I write a letter to you, can you pass it on to them? That way you're not kind of giving me their name. And if they are interested in talking to me, they can. And of course, in that letter, I said, by the way, your family is my family in many ways. I've gone through this. My family has been wiped out. That's why I'm actually become interested in this. I want to, kind of help people understand this. I want to show this great scientific achievement by Lee and Frau Meany. And that was really kind of helpful. I think that people, so that I did get in touch with two younger members of that family. Remember, that family was really wiped out. It's been really terrible. The surname was Kilius, and that's what Dr. Frau Meany had remembered. But again, they knew a lot of the recent history of the family. They didn't know a lot about, kind of the early years of research. So my next step was to say to the National Cancer Institute, which is, hey, I presume because this family has been studied so much that somewhere there are all the documents, medical records, et cetera, et cetera. And, can I have access to that? And again, the answer was, well, kind of that's confidentiality. And I said, okay, I get it. How about if these family members, if the surviving family members say, kind of, he can look at that, kind of, will that be okay? And that was, yes, unlocked it. And that was so important. And I've got to, kind of thank that family so much, because it's painful to have to talk about all this stuff and to reveal this stuff. But I was able to get the medical records, and it was amazing. It was a treasure trove. It was beyond my wildest dreams. Not just was it the kind of hospital records of many of these family members, but it was letters that Dr. Lee had written, kind of to hospitals around the country, and that family members he had been in contact with as he tried to build the family tree. It was like almost a kind of a week-to-week recounting of his detective work. It was like a detective.
Yeah.
So that was kind of incredibly important.
Yeah, and you finding Nancy.
Yes, and the final piece was they were very helpful, but even the medical records couldn't tell me all the details about. So the Kilius family was mostly on the West Coast. They were spread all over, but a lot of them were on the West Coast. But kind of Dr. Lee and Frau Meany had come across his father and son in Baltimore, and I was like, well, how did that happen? And Dr. Frau Meany didn't remember. So I found out that although the father had died of leukemia within a year of getting it, his baby son survived, lived until he was 29, had many subsequent cancers, lived until he was 29, but was married. And I found a mention of his wife's name. His wife's name was fairly common. It was kind of difficult to track her down, but it took a while. But I found her, and I wrote her an email and said, by the way, I think you're the person I'm looking for. Can you help me out? Kind of, and again, explain kind of my background and why I was working on this. And in response, I got an email initially, not from her, but from her former mother-in-law, Nancy Kilius Gould, who the wife of the husband, the mother of the son, who had cancer. And she was able to give me, kind of the amazing story about how they had ended up in Baltimore, because even though they were on the West Coast, kind of they had been told that the only possible treatment might be at the NCI, so they had traveled across the country. She told me, the terrifying story about, kind of getting home from the hospital, kind of where her husband was being treated one day, and kind of her babysitter said, I feel a lump on his arm, and kind of being totally frightened, kind of taking him to the doctor, kind of right away, and the doctor saying, yeah, I think this is cancer. We may have to cut off his arm, amputate his arm to save him. And she was like, oh my gosh. But then they decided, kind of, look, we can just kind of cut the muscle out. It was an amazing story. And can you imagine, kind of Nancy getting this, kind of email from this, totally unknown person. Kind of basically, and it wasn't worded exactly this way, but it's basically, I wanted you to talk and open up about the most painful things in your life. And, kind of, she was like, I need to think about this, but very quickly said, I see what you're doing. This can help a lot of people. So yes, kind of, I'll talk to you. Kind of just wonderful. I can't tell you how touched I've been by them and by other people, kind of, kind of since the book has been published too, about, kind of how meaningful it has been for them.
Yeah, let's talk a few minutes about that, because one of the things I find kind of amazing about this book also is that despite this amazing, painful loss that you've experienced with your family, there's remarkably little anger, in your book. It's really a very hopeful story and, poignant. But I guess I wanted to ask you, and this gets back to the question about scientists collaborating versus competing. Do you think things could have been further along or moved faster if they had worked together rather than competing against each other? And do you feel any anger that there's not more to offer families beyond screening at this point, despite how many years have gone by?
I think I've long ago decided, kind of the anger over any of this is just not a good thing to have. In the case of my nephew Charlie, so Charlie, had cancer when he was 2, and then not for another almost 30 years, not until he was 29 or 30 did he have his second cancer. And that cancer was he'd gone to a doctor, he was having abdominal problems. He, said, I think there's something wrong. The doctor, didn't suspect anything, although I think he should have asked more questions at that time, because he had a person who was a previous cancer patient, had histories of cancer in his family, a lot of cancers in the family. And it wasn't until 8 months later he says, oh, maybe we should do a colonoscopy, and found that he had colon cancer. I think that the doctor failed him then. And, I don't think I've ever heard my brother or his wife be angry about that. The anger doesn't serve a lot of purpose, I think. And that was particularly tragic because for Charlie to kind of defeat that colorectal cancer he had in 2010, he had to get a lot of radiation, and radiation, itself can lead to cancers. And so, 7 years later, cancer came back for Charlie. His last cancer. It was in his hip, so tragically, to try to save him, they amputated his leg up, his right leg, including his hip. But even then, it metastasized. Would that have happened if, maybe not if the doctor had been more aggressive years earlier. But again, I feel that, anger doesn't serve it. When I look at the scientific progress, I think, could it be faster? Yes. But I do see if you look at the arc of what has happened over the past 50, 60 years, the understanding of cancer, the survivor rates of many cancers, not all cancers, have improved dramatically. So yes, it would be nice if it'd be faster. It would be nice if we get, better therapies. But, science moves at its own pace. I don't think anybody's trying not to move fast. I just think that it moves at a pace that often is frustratingly slow. And we may not be happy about that, but you can't rush, science.
So what's, kind of coming to the end in the sense of the conversation. It's just been so amazing. I have so many questions, but I guess I want to at least end with a few minutes where we can talk about what's the message of this book? What do you want people to take away? Where should we go next? So I'm hoping that people kind of understand, this is about family. It's about discovery. It's about connection and reconnection. And there's no point in your life that you shouldn't feel that this is something that is important to you. One of the things I noted in my book is occasionally I come across people who are estranged from their siblings. I got to tell you, for somebody who has no siblings, go and yes, there may be a good reason that you're estranged from your sibling, but try to figure it out. I wish I had my siblings. And I have none. And the other message is, I think I'm trying to it's of hope
there are heartbreaking aspects of this book. But also, I think, there are inspirational aspects. These scientists were true heroes. They dedicated to helping people, and there are a lot of scientists. And there's a bit of cynicism about science now, but scientists, really, these Lee and Framini and the others who joined them, wanted to solve something, not just to solve something. They wanted to solve something to help people. So there's an inspirational aspect of this. And, carrying on their work, there are a lot of doctors that are carrying on their work. There's an association, the Lee-Framini Syndrome Association, which is kind of a support group, but also, raises fund for research, hoping to solve this someday. And, so many of these, it is a very rare mutation. There are only probably 5,000 to 10,000 families in the U.S. with it. People still go to doctors, and doctors have never heard of it. So part of the book, I think, is to raise awareness. Again, a lot of people have reached out to me and said, "Thank you for writing this." People will now understand, what my family has been going through in a way that they probably never have been able to understand that.
And one of the people who writes a letter to you is a doctor who worked on this and has a company that's trying to come up with drugs that would tackle the, P53. So
yeah, so that was one of the kind of touching moments after the book was published. Arnold LaVine, who's one of the most renowned cancer researchers of the past 50 years, and he's got a small role in the book because he's done a lot of P53 research. He wasn't on the team that discovered the mutation, but he sent me a note and he said, "I just love the way that you kind of weave together the families and the research, because that's what it's all about. That's what we're trying to do. It is about the families and explaining how difficult the research is." And he's been working for many years, trying to come up with solutions along with other doctors, new therapies. And there's an acknowledgement, hey, this is going to be, it's hard. We understand that. But we're also hoping that there might be some breakthrough. I do think mostly we shouldn't expect a magic bullet. I think for a long time people thought that might be possible with cancer. I think that we can expect constant incremental improvements going forward. That's going to help families with hereditary conditions, and by extension all families with cancer. But let's have realistic expectations that we're still years away from solving this.
Yeah. Larry, thank you so much for this remarkable book. I know it's going to help a lot of people.
Amy, it's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Same.
Thanks for listening to this week's Afterwards podcast. If you are interested in podcasts about nonfiction books, listen to C-SPAN's Book Notes Plus podcast for interviews with authors and historians hosted by Brian Lamb.